Hey, inspired moneymaker. We can all be better communicators, and it's a skill that can improve our impact, career, and personal lives. We're going to talk to a YouTuber who coaches executives and entrepreneurs to become top communicators in their industries. Episode 245 features Brenden Kumarasamy, communication expert, founder of MasterTalk.
What I'm asking for is 5 times a day, 5 minutes a day. Remember, communication is never relative to the world. It's always relative to the people who are in the industry. And that's why I always say the transformation is top 1% communicator in your industry. What does that mean? That means if you're an accountant and there's 100 accountants in the room, that you're easily the best communicator amongst your community of accountants. So ask yourself this simple question. How many accountants are willing to do the random word exercise 100 times? Forget 1,000, just 100 times in their life. Not a day, not every week, not every month, in their life. Because it only takes 100 minutes to do the random word exercise 100 times. But here's the punchline, Andy. Most people aren't willing to give 100 minutes out of their life to stand out from the 99% of their industry. So the question you need to all ask yourselves is, are you just going to write down how cool this exercise is? Or are you going to book 5 minutes in your schedule every day for 3 weeks, not 3 years, 3 weeks, to do it more times than your industry is willing to do it for?
I'm Andy Wong, host of the Inspired Money podcast and financial advisor at Runnymede Capital Management. This episode is brought to you by Yachty.com. My friend Everald Reed launched Yachty to showcase Jamaica's best products and local vendors. With just a couple mouse clicks, I can treat myself to authentic Jamaican Blue Mountain coffee. We love it at our house. It's balanced, full-bodied, but without the bitterness. I also love the breadfruit chips and natural bar soaps. It's great knowing that every purchase at Yachty.com directly supports local Jamaican small businesses. You've got to try Blue Mountain coffee for yourself. Go to Yachty.com, that's YAAHDY.com, and make sure to use coupon code MONEY for 10% off your entire order. Try it and let me know what you think. Now on to the show. We've got Brenden on the show today, and he wants us to master the art of communication. As an experienced speaker and facilitator, Brenden is the founder of MasterTalk, where he inspires and coaches people to become the best communicators and public speakers they can be. His clients include IBM, McGill University, and Upstart. His popular MasterTalk YouTube channel provides free access to communication tools to everyone in the world. In this episode, you'll learn about leaving corporate consulting to coach better communication to students and CEOs, how to monetize a YouTube channel when you don't have millions of subscribers, and make sure you tune into the end for a random word exercise that's going to boost your communication skills. Now let's get inspired with Brenden Kumarasamy. Brenden, welcome to Inspired Money. I'm so excited to have you on the show.
Andy, the pleasure is absolutely mine. Thanks for having me on.
Let's jump right in. What's your earliest childhood memory of money?
I would say scarcity. I didn't grow up with a lot of money personally. My parents were factory workers. I was the poorest guy on earth. I mean, I was still born in Canada, so I definitely had a lot going for me. But both of my parents had minimum wage salaries, so my whole life was actually around the topic of money. How do I make more of it? How do I become more successful so that my parents don't have to suffer anymore in the same way we all did as a family? So that's probably my earliest childhood memory.
What were those conversations like, parent to child?
Oh, a ton. I would say the one that sticks out to me was making every dollar count. That's one piece. The other piece was a lot of negative languaging around money that always stuck with me. It took a lot of coaching to untrain. And by the way, I'm still figuring that out too. Is groceries are really expensive, gas prices are through the roof. All this is crazy expensive. You have so much debt. And then when I started making 80, 90 grand a year as a consultant at IBM a few years ago when I worked there, I realized that wait a second, it's not that expensive. Like, it's not crazy. We're not buying a Ferrari here. And I feel that a lot of those conversations was really around that the whole world was too expensive for us to actually enjoy ourselves. I remember this one specific story. It was Christmas, and my dad asked me what I wanted for Christmas, and I said I wanted this game. It was like $50. And he said, $50 is a lot of money, Brent. Are you sure you want this game? You don't want to get anything from the dollar store? And that's when I realized that we really didn't have a lot of money growing up, and I needed to make a difference in that area to be successful.
I want to go back to what you were saying, working as a consultant. You were at IBM as a business transformation consultant. You took the leap to become a public speaking coach at a very young age. So I want to hear what your thought process was for making that transition. And I'm also curious if, if your parents had thoughts about making that shift.
They definitely did. So let's start at the beginning, Andy. Love these questions. So the beginning was in business school. I went to university, and my whole goal was to get a job in management consulting or investment banking. That's the way out for a lot of us, or accounting, where you have a guaranteed stable in the business world, anyways, multi six-figure paycheck if you play the game long enough. And I honestly thought entrepreneurship was for losers who couldn't get six-figure corporate jobs. I was like, who cares about being an entrepreneur? There's so much risk. Like, I'm sure your family at some point were immigrants too, where, they give us an opportunity to have a high end education. Education's the way out for most of us. And I still believe that, by the way, statistically. Maybe in the US it might be different, but definitely in Canada, with school fees is being a little bit lower than in the States, education is definitely out for most of us. So I went to school and I started doing these things called case competitions. Think of it like professional sports, but for nerds. So the guys were playing basketball or rugby or baseball. I wasn't the type of guy. I did presentations competitively, but it was mostly to get a job because a lot of these big companies, Andy, they sponsor these competitions. And then I started coaching the students, mostly for free back then, on how to communicate ideas so that they could get jobs at Goldman, they could get jobs at Bain and all of these consulting firms because these programs are the feeder schools. But I accidentally, Andy, through that process, I accidentally developed a skill set on how to coach other people on how to speak because of that experience. And that's what led to Master Talk. So without avoiding a monologue too much, let me just quickly point out here with the transition. Quitting my job was the hardest decision I ever made in my life, Andy, by far. And the reason was because all of my identity was tied in that corporate job. My whole life's goal was to make six figures and get out of poverty. When I achieved that, I realized there was a big gaping hole in my meaning in life, in my purpose. And that's what allowed me to transition. But the conversation with my parents was actually really simple. They were fully supportive, but there's a reason they were fully supportive. It wasn't just because I said, "Oh, let me just jump the ship." I think the biggest mistake people make, Andy, when they transition to entrepreneurship is they expect other people to support them. They expect other people to react in a certain way versus you adapting to them. So I had multiple conversations with my mom in particular, and I said, "What matters to you?" And she said, "Security." And I said, "Look, I'm not just jumping into this entrepreneurship willy nilly. I had 50% of my income already in place. I had a 9 month emergency fund, and I had great relationships at IBM. So if I screwed up in entrepreneurship, I can always go back to my corporate job." And that's how I dealt with those conversations.
So you were already making half of what your consulting salary was?
Correct. You got it. So I was making around 75K, 80K in the Montreal market as a consultant. I had replaced 30, 40 grand. This is probably a year and a half. Obviously now I do much better, but back then that was the number. You got it.
Well, it's pretty wild. I want to ask you because with Master Talk, with your YouTube channel, over 23,000 subscribers, not everybody is able to monetize. Not everybody's able to build an audience either. But you were able to build an audience. How were you able to translate that into, getting paid so that you could make the transition away from the corporate job?
Beautiful, brother. Here's the way I think about this. In some ways, I did get lucky, I'll be honest, where my business partner's double my age, a lot more mature and wiser than I am, and he taught me how to monetize this game. But what I will say is at the end of the day, Andy, I've always believed in the following. If you cannot do your side hustle part time, forget about doing it full time. Because entrepreneurship, I don't recommend for most people. Obviously, I'm super happy with the choice I made now. But I'd say for most human beings, entrepreneurship is a bad game to play because it requires something that is fundamentally against human nature, which is the ability and willingness to adapt and change rapidly. Because if you're not willing to challenge your own thinking, your own way of doing things really fast, you're not going to be successful as an entrepreneur. So what happened with me, MasterTalk was just a fluke, Andy. I was just making videos for fun. It was never meant to be a business at the beginning. I literally started in my mother's basement, which I still am in, by the way, so I can save my burn rate and have more cash flow to invest in other things. Like, I literally started on that couch over there that I think we stole. Like, I was just making fun videos while I was working at a job at IBM. But then as the months went by, the videos slowly got better and better. And then 9 months into MasterTalk, once again, had no ambitions to make this a business. I was having so much fun working as a consultant. This is great. I make a ton of money. Sure, I work long hours, but I like the job. It's good. But then I went to a personal development conference. I went to Summit of Greatness by this guy named Lewis Howes. He's a podcaster. And I went to this guy's event in the middle of nowhere. It's in Columbus, Ohio. And I met my business partner there. And he's the one who looked at me and he said, you can charge executives thousands of dollars for coaching, right? And I just looked at him and I literally said this verbatim, dude, what are you talking about? I'm like 23, man. That was my like quote, direct quote at the time. But what he had convinced me to think about was there's always somebody in the marketplace if you have something of value that they're willing to pay for. And the last piece around this is you got to try a bunch of things before something actually works. So I started trying to monetize with students. It didn't work because they were really hungry, but they couldn't afford coaching. And then I tried CEOs of tech startups. They were really hungry too, but they were too early stage for capital. They didn't have money. Then I tried B2B, but a lot of them said, well, we don't trust you. You're like 23 years old. What are you going to teach our executives? So none of it was working until I landed on my amazing niche, which ended up being technology executives in the Indian community specifically. So my niche ended up being male technology professionals who are Desi just means brown people, who are living in the United States. Why were those people willing to pay money? And he's the one who gave me my first clients. That's why I got lucky with Vamsi. Vamsi, my business partner. How did that work? Well, because they're Indian born, their second language is often English. They're managers at Facebook, they're managers at Amazon, and they make, let's say, 130, 150 grand, but they can't become vice presidents without communication. And I'm the only person they trust because I'm brown too. And that's how I was able to build a niche for myself. So you never know where the business is going to come from. You just got to try a bunch of things until it works.
The business experts always say to niche down, or marketing experts. Once you started building that portfolio of business, then can you start broadening your client base outside of that?
I love what you said there, Andy. Here's where I would give a different perspective. I'm not actually a big fan of niching down right away. I think that's nice and cool. Like, obviously, now I can tell you this is my niche, this is my focus. It's like people whose first language is English, they'll almost never hire me because they don't feel the pain enough to invest thousands of dollars into themselves. Whereas someone from, let's say, the Chinese community, Indian community, etc., they will. But that's easy for me to say now. Right, because I've tried all of the niches. So what's the real advice? The real advice, in my opinion, is you got to try every demographic and then understand why people are paying you later. So at the beginning, when I started selling my first packages and people were saying yes, I honestly didn't know why. It's like, why are they spending thousands of dollars on this? So I literally obviously, I wasn't a terrible coach. I knew how to deliver because I've been doing it. I've been in the business now for 7 years. I've been a coach, but I didn't know how to sell. That was the problem. I didn't know how to market. So when I started landing customers because of my YouTube channel, I was just talking to my CFO in Toronto and I was just like, why did you buy this? Literally, after I got him the result, why did you do this? And he said, oh, Brenden, because of XYZ reason. And I said, oh, okay, you're feeling this fear. It's preventing you from getting your next promotion. So why am I saying all of this, Andy? I'm saying all of this to say the following. That we don't know who our niche is until we've actually tried and splattered a bunch of things on a wall. And then we figure out and we focus in on what sticks. But to your point, I definitely don't think broadening later helps. I actually think the opposite makes more sense. Broaden, like, message all of your friends. Try and sell your goddamn lemonade to everyone and see who actually buys it and try to understand why by asking them conversations and then niche down. But I only recommend broadening out until you're like a multi-seven-figure business owner at the very minimum.
I love that you just keep stumbling into things and figuring it out. It's not like you put pen to paper and said, this is exactly what I'm going to do. I'm mapping out my plan to be a coach You just kept kind of rolling with the punches after making YouTube videos.
Absolutely. And I think that's the big challenge, especially with the MBA types. And this is funny because I come from business school, right? So it's funny that I'm saying this of all people, even if I didn't do my MBA and I never will. But I think the point that I want to drive is a lot of people intellectualize business. That could work with a corporate job where you have to intellectualize certain tasks and responsibilities, where you have a clearly defined set of responsibilities and the market pays a certain amount of value for those skills and services, right? Do these things for me, I'll pay you X number of dollars based on what the market is willing to bear for those tasks. That's why a job is fairly straightforward, provided you're good enough to do that specific job. But in entrepreneurship, that doesn't fly at all because reality needs to hit you in the face for you to actually realize what does work. Like if you had asked me, oh my God, I mean, to just go into this, if you had asked me 3 years ago how I was planning on monetize, I would have said something stupid. Like, oh yeah, when I have 100,000 or 200,000 YouTube followers, I'm going to make like $5,000 a month in ads and I'll be able to quit on that, which is true in theory. But in practice, in my niche, that just doesn't make any sense. No one's going out there screaming to the high heavens, I really need public speaking YouTube videos right now. Like no one is running around yelling that into the sky, right? Instead, the model ended up being serve the world. That's the point of MasterTalk, right? How do you create videos that everyone can learn from, even if they can't afford me? But use the money that 50 of those subscribers are paying me thousands of dollars for to actually fund for the other 23,000. So the model is always different. But to your point, most people just sit in a box and they're not afraid. They're afraid to fail. Like another thing I'll tell you as well, and then this goes into the principle that I'll share is I sent 50,000 cold emails to university professors. I'm not exaggerating that number. So when I started MasterTalk, I had this brilliant idea in quotation marks, completely screwed it up. And I was like, okay, if I send videos to university professors, Andy, this is going to work. Like if I send them videos, I didn't have these resources. I wasn't selling them anything. I was just like, hey, here's some free videos. And they all spat in my face. And I was too stubborn. Which brings me to my last point. I've always believed that the best entrepreneurs are often driven by ideology, not money. What does that mean? I was just really passionate about solving this problem. I just felt that, wait a second, like people who are 15 years old, the next Elon Musks of our society, they can only rely on me, literally in the world right now, I believe anyways, to provide them free resources. So if I don't figure this shit out, no one else will. So you also need that relentless pursuit. You need to really care. And that's why you find a lot of the best businesses like Airbnb or Uber often get started by accident.
I love the idea that it sounds like with your model, you don't need 1 million followers. Where most influencers, right? If somebody's making YouTube videos, their dream is kind of like, I want 5 million subscribers. I'm going to monetize. With that big an audience, I can get sponsorships and, brand deals, and I'm going to be making a lot of money. But yours is like, 5,000 might be enough. 20,000 might be enough. And certainly with SEO, with search engine optimization, there are a lot of people who have to give a presentation and they're in a panic. And where do we go? We go to YouTube. You're like, I got to learn from YouTube. I can up my game a little bit. And they can find your videos. Do you find that that is lead generation for your clients for one-on-one coaching?
100%, Andy. So most of my coaching these days are group, but what I will say to your question, which I love, is let me actually emphasize the point further. Forget 5,000. We're talking 50. And this is something I always tell people is you only need to be famous to the people who buy from you. You don't need to be famous to everybody. You just need to be famous to the person who's looking for a communication coach, the person who's looking for financial services, the person who's looking for whatever that you're selling. And the other piece as well that people don't really get with YouTube either is how I matured over time is I never looked at the subscriber count. Even if I did want it to be bigger, I focused more on the content library aspect of YouTube. Let me give you a simple example to demonstrate this, Andy. Most of my business, besides word of mouth, of course, because I deliver, is not from YouTube, actually. It's from LinkedIn. So how the money comes in, as you can probably guess, a lot of professionals who can actually afford communication coach are on LinkedIn. But how I close them is with YouTube. So how does that make any sense? Let me explain this. So let's say a prospect reaches out. Typical client of mine is like a technology executive. So they're probably considering me and two other people, let's say, as an example. So they message me on LinkedIn, they see my content, and they go, "Hey, Brenden, what are your services like?" So instead of selling them on my services, I just ask them, "What's your biggest challenge right now in communication?" Whereas the other two coaches are trying to sell them directly. The person, let's say that person's name is John. John says, "I'm really struggling with keep speaking at meetings." So instead of booking a call with them, I just said, "Hey, I made a full YouTube video that's 100% sharing everything that you need to do about speaking up in meetings. You want to watch this for 7 minutes and let me know what you think?" They click that link. They go, "Wow, this YouTube channel is really professional. This person is really credible. Wow, these tips are really good. I've already selected Brenden as my vendor." So I've already won the deal before even talking to this person. So when they get on a call with me, right? I always Sharon Shriva. I always mispronounce his name, but Sharon is the guy's name. He sold a massive real estate company. He says this so well. He said, "Fame is the best business model." Because then when I get on a call with them, they go, "Oh wow, it's so great to meet you, Brenden," and they pretty much always convert, and that's how I make my sales.
I love that because if you're in competition against two other coaches, you send them to YouTube, you're getting a testimonial from yourself, but you don't have to say it.
100%. And there's so many other benefits too, Andy, is the status game of YouTube. This is what people don't get is like if you're really good on other social media, no one really cares. Like if you got 100,000 on LinkedIn, no one goes up there and says, "Oh, I know these people who are just famous off LinkedIn." So it doesn't buy you on his social credits. And the other piece is Instagram too. Sure, you can have 100,000 on Instagram. If you tell people you have a famous Instagram page, no one's running after it. They gotta go, "Okay, you got Instagram." But if you say you're a YouTuber, the first reflex always, that's why YouTube is very strategic for me. It's not just me, some kid making videos on YouTube. People immediately go, "Oh, what's your YouTube channel? I'm curious." Because not a lot of people create YouTube videos because it's so hard to create content. So, but where does this go back to as a principle for the audience, though, Andy? Self-awareness is so important, but let me add a little bit more seasoning that Gary Vee doesn't really spend that much time adding some sauce to this. What does self-awareness actually mean? Self-awareness to me means clearly understanding what you're good at, but having an equal understanding of what you're absolute garbage at. So I'll make that list for you right now. As you can tell, I'm pretty real as a guest. I don't like to BS on podcasts. So for me, what am I good at? I'm very good at attention. I'm absolutely dangerous in media, especially in my industry where most coaches in my niche are really boring. Like when you watch my YouTube videos, they're interesting. I don't just go there and I say, "Hi everyone, blah, blah, blah." Same thing on a podcast, right? I don't just like say fluffy things. I get right to the meat. So somebody who spends the time to listen to me for 45 minutes can go, "Okay, this person's credible." Whether it's to watch my free stuff or paid, whatever the person is. That's one piece I'm absolutely dangerous at. The other piece is I'm very good on camera talent. I'm really good to be in front of a camera, and I'm really good at delivering workshops. But I suck at structuring businesses. I'm terrible at the camera, how to edit software, how to do all of those things. What else am I terrible at? I mean, oh my God. I was terrible at coaching for the first few years. I'm not so terrible anymore. I'm really bad at marketing. I'm a shit marketer. I'm really bad at sales too. So I'm much better at delivery. So my weakness right now in my business is top of funnel. Whereas when somebody is actually paid my service, it's really easy for me to deliver because I'll lose my life over trying to get them a service, trying to get them the result. But getting them to know me, my God, is that a challenge because I'm super young. So no one really knows me. So why am I telling you all this? Why am I giving you all this up front? Because the best entrepreneurs on the planet understand what they're really good at, what they're really shit at, and they hire out their weaknesses, even if it's convincing their friends to work for them for free, which I did initially with my YouTube videos, and then obviously I pay them now. So that's really the key here is being self-aware. Like if someone who's introverted and is a coach, like Dan Sullivan is a great example of this, he shouldn't be doing what I'm doing and he makes $100 million a year. He shouldn't be like on a podcast yelling to the sky heavens. He should be doing word of mouth more, doing more books, writing better emails. So it's all about understanding who you are and tripling down on your strengths and hiring out the weaknesses.
When you're 23 and you're talking to corporate executives, how do you get over that hump of your age? Because I think there are two sides of that. One is their perception of you thinking, "Oh, this guy's young. How can he help me?" But it's also you. It's you getting out of your head and not having that be an issue. Because sometimes when you're young and you're insecure, like you're afraid to ask for the business.
100%, Andy. So there's two parts to that. Luckily, I'm 26 now, so I guess it's less of an issue. Even if I still look like I'm 12, I'll be honest. But what I will say is you're absolutely right. At the beginning of the business, I had a lot of struggle with this. So there's two parts to this. The first part that you touched upon indirectly is the idea of imposter syndrome, right? Where we find ourselves in positions where we don't feel like we belong. We don't feel like we're a part of that. And I'm definitely the king of imposter syndrome. I don't mean that to gloat. I mean that in the sense like, yeah, I've experienced it because I've worked with CEOs, and I still do, obviously, who have worked longer in the business than I've been alive. So how do we overcome this? Here's an analogy I'd love to propose for us today, Andy. Where do you live? Like, what state do you live in? I'll use you as an analogy.
I'm in New Jersey.
You're in New Jersey. Okay, awesome. So let's say I came to New Jersey, okay? And I said, hey, Andy, I'm new to the city. I always go to New York City, but now I'm in New Jersey for some reason. So let's say some city like Trenton or something. And I go, okay, what should I do in the city? You'll probably tell me because you know the state, you know the city that you're in. You'll say, oh, Brenden, go here, visit this place, do this thing, right? In the same way that if you came to Montreal, probably like 8 hours away from you or 9 hours away by drive, you'll probably ask me the same thing. Hey, Bray, I'm in the city. What should I do? I'll probably tell you. You should go to this chicken place unless you're vegan. Don't go to that chicken place. You should go to this attraction. You should go do this thing, right? So it makes sense so far. But don't you find that bizarre, Andy? Because we're not tour guides. We're not traveling experts. We don't know our cities inside and out. Yet, we're super open and willing to share random nonsense out of our mouth without ever thinking about whether we're the expert or not. But when it comes to our actual expertise, the thing that we spend time honing, whether it's podcasting, whether it's public speaking, we hesitate to share that information out to the world. So why is there a dislocation there? Why is there a misalignment between some pieces of information in our mind and other pieces? And the answer goes back to, what is the definition of an expert? A lot of people tend to believe, Andy, that the definition of an expert is having a PhD, having a master's degree in something. Whereas that's how I define expertise. The way that I define expertise is being one step ahead of the next person in that specific thing. So in the same way, I could probably learn from you on how to host a podcast. I mean, doing a phenomenal job with the questions and giving space to guests to just rant and talk. You're doing a phenomenal job with this. So I've already learned from you. Okay, I'm a big blabbermouth. Let me learn from Andy here. Versus, you could probably learn from me about how to increase vocal projections, how to communicate effectively, etc., even if you're already pretty great yourself. But the point is, there's always something that we can learn from other people. So what's the punchline? The punchline ties into the second part of your question. Start with the people you're comfortable serving first. Ali Gadet says this best. If you help one person, the world will give you permission to help everyone else. I didn't start with CEOs. I know that sounds cool for me to say now. It sounds kind of braggadocious, but I didn't start with that. I started with 15-year-old girls and boys because that's what I was comfortable coaching, because I didn't know what I was doing back then when I was in year one. I just did it because it was fun. And then I started coaching people my own age, 19, 20 back then. Then I started coaching people older than me. And then I started developing a C-suite client base. And you would think C-suite was 45-year-old CFO at a company. Not quite. C-suite for me started with people my own age. Why? Because a lot of my friends became CEOs of technology startups at like 22 or 23, but they didn't have money. So they just said, hey, Brenden, can you coach me? And I said, yeah, sure, dude, I'll do it for free. And I started helping them. And through conversation with them, because these are smart people, I started figuring out what CEOs actually really care about. And I was able to then translate that for an older demographic later in the business. But now this brings us to the second part of your question, Andy, which is, how did I get people older than me to buy into me? Super simple. Okay, it's so simple that nobody does it. Realize that you should only be selling the person who wants to be sold to, the person who wants to be sold to. So what does that mean? I created a funnel to create credibility, which is what I'll talk about at the end of this episode probably, is I do a free training. So what I do is I have 100 executives, 1,000 executives come to this thing, and 99% of them, for sure, will go, yeah, this is great. I loved it. Great information, but I won't trust this guy with my money. But it doesn't matter, Andy. All I need is for 1% or 0.1% of those people to say, you know what? I've tried 3 communications coaches before and they all sucked. This guy's a bit cheaper than the competition. He had a great free training. Let me take a chance on him. And that's how I started my client base. But all I needed, Andy, because I'm exceptional at deliver, all I needed was 1 or 2 of these people to say yes to me. So Vamsi was my first yes. He introduced me to all of his client base. He said, look, I trust you. You're a great coach. Let's split the revenue 50-50. Why don't you just go coach my first 15 executives? And I blew it out of the water. And those 15 spreaded word of mouth. And that's how I got to the end.
Nice.
Yeah.
I love the revenue share too. So there was skin in the game for both sides. Motivation.
Correct.
Years ago, Brenden, I went to a presentation. I don't remember who it was or what the topic was, but the opening was to the audience. Who here is an expert? And you got a fair number of people raising their hands. And the speaker said, okay. Who here is a guru? And no one really raised their hand. And he said, you know what the difference is between an expert and a guru? Guru raises 2 hands. And I love that. And it goes back to your, what makes an expert, and everybody has imposter syndrome. Sometimes you just have to raise your hand and you say, okay, I'm an expert. And then raise 2 hands, you can be a guru. I want to get into, because I don't really know what a communications coach does. Like, I don't know how you work with your clients. One of the things that I do understand that you do very well, and I would assume that this is what you teach your clients. How does one get better at thinking and communicating in stories?
Absolutely. And I love that story too. It's really good. So what I would share on this is, for me, the principle of how I think about transformation, because I'm a 100% practitioner, right? I learned everything by failing. Like, I have a bachelor's degree in accountancy. My whole life I presented in French, not English. I also have a crooked left arm. Like, I'm like everything besides what you would think of the ideal communication coach. So everything I learned was through trial and error. So what I found through that experience is what's worked the best is building momentum. The first thing that we need to train out of somebody who's either listening to this podcast or who does coaching with somebody is first convincing them that they can become exceptional communicators in the first place. Most people who hire a communication coach or something of the sort do not believe that they can get the result, right? Their mindset is always, well, Brenden is special. Brenden is cool. Andy's a great speaker. Yeah, these guys are cool, but I can't do this. So the first piece and the most important piece in this coaching kind of environment, this ecosystem, or the process rather, is to break that barrier. Because once you break that barrier, the rest is super easy. I mean, you could teach them anything that's super advanced and they'll feel like, oh yeah, I'm a great communicator. So what does that first step look like? And this doesn't just apply in communication, that applies in any skill. So the question I always ask myself, and I'll give the answer to it, is what is the easiest possible win that I can deliver somebody that convinces them that they can be an exceptional communicator?
I'll give you one.
Yeah, go ahead, jump in.
Because I'm just going to guess here. But if you're working with Indian, Asian, Chinese, executives who are in corporate, many of them feel like, when I have something to say in a meeting, people aren't listening to me. They don't hear me. So how do you equip them to communicate better so that they are heard? And then suddenly they come back to you and they're like, Brenden, you just blew my mind. It worked.
I love that. That's exceptional. I love what you shared. That's definitely a big point. I mean, I guess you clearly understand the demo yourself, but yeah. But
this can apply to anybody, right? Any demographic. Right. It doesn't just have to be an Asian person. But since we just came out of AAPI Heritage Month, a lot of that topic has been, voiced that, people in corporate are saying that, I'm not being recognized for my ideas and I'm not getting the promotion. So...
Absolutely. And just to emphasize this further, because it's important, the reason for those who are listening to this and kind of like, what are these guys talking about? The reason why the Asian community, the Indian community struggle with this specifically is because they're always made in comparison to their American counterparts, right? So when, let's say somebody's going up for promotion, whether they're an Asian background or an American background, and they're the both same skill level, usually the American gets the promotion if they have better communication skills, especially in the higher levels of leadership. That's not true at the beginning, by the way. If you're like an engineer, a manager, no. The immigrant's going to get promoted because they're really good contributors, generally speaking. So that's where the challenge comes from. So here's my answer, Andy. The answer is yes and no. So what does that mean? Yes, in the sense that if you get them that specific result, they'll go like, oh my God, I have to tell my friends about you. But the way the result is delivered is not by talking directly about that. So I know that's a bit weird, but hear me out a little bit. So what I have them do is I have them do an exercise that people can practice at home, by the way. You don't need to hire a coach for this. That's called the random word exercise. So the random word exercise is super simple. You pick a random word like phone, like copper, like headset, like hair, and you have them do random presentations. And this is to help unlearn a lot of the habits that they have around communication, that it needs to be structured, it needs to be strict, it needs to be on point, it needs to be on the dial, versus have fun with this. In the same way you have fun with sports, let's start to do the thing that is harder than the boardroom so that the boardroom becomes a joke. So here's what happens, Andy. Someone does the exercise once and they think they can't do it. Oh my God, I'm just picking a random word. I'm giving a presentation. How is this even possible? But then they do it 10 times. Then they do it 15 times. Or if I'm coaching you, they do it 100 times. They squeeze their arm enough until they do it so many times that they have the feeling internally that the next time they walk into a meeting, they go, wait a second. None of these guys and gals have done the random word exercise 100 times. I'm better than all of these clowns. And that internal confidence is built because they earned it. So when they do the random word exercise, what happens, interestingly, after being the mad scientist that I am, I've tried all of this, is that they feel that internal confidence without me ever even telling them how to structure meetings. I probably did that in like week 8. But the first part is really they feel internally that they already have the answer. They have the structure. They just need the confidence to speak up their ideas, and that's what the random word exercise gives them.
Can I put you on the spot and you can show us what that looks like?
Yeah, of course.
I will give you the random word of coffee.
Amazing. So you made my life super easy. So for those who are listening to this, Andy did not give me the word coffee prior to this interview. So let's see how I do. It's Sunday morning, and I'm enjoying my first cup of coffee. Coffee is such a powerful way to start our day. But so many of us, Andy, we use coffee in the wrong way. Whether it's rushing to a Starbucks and grabbing it like it's some thing on the side and we drink it and we don't really pay attention to it. There's some people who use that very same cup of coffee to enjoy the beautiful garden outside, to enjoy the small time to read their newspaper, to ask their kids how their day is going, how their morning is going. So many of us use that cup of coffee for very completely different purposes. So the question that I have for all of you listening to this podcast right now is, how are you showing up with your cup of coffee? Are you showing out like some stressed, complicated, crazy person who's just trying to drink it like it's some Tylenol or some Advil that you're kind of choking down a bunch of pills with your glass of water? Or are you using your cup of coffee to enjoy the beautiful day that is life, to enjoy the beautiful moments that we get to share? And I'll leave that choice up to you. So that's the random word exercise.
That's what great communication looks like. Did you ever study and practice improv or no?
I did a little bit of improv, but I haven't done a lot of it to be dangerous. But what I would say in the context of the random word exercise, Andy, is at the beginning, you're going to be terrible at this thing. So when I started doing balcony and saying, balcony is like a building and you work on the building and you have no idea what you're doing. But once you've done the exercise 3,000 times like I have, you really get to a place where you feel that it's really easy. But I'm not asking people to do it 3,000 times either, Andy. What I'm asking for is 5 times a day, 5 minutes a day. Remember, communication is never relative to the world. It's always relative to the people who are in the industry. And that's why I always say the transformation is top 1% communicator in your industry. What does that mean? That means if you're an accountant, And there's 100 accountants in the room that you're easily the best communicator amongst your community of accountants. So ask yourself this simple question. How many accountants are willing to do the random word exercise 100 times? Forget 1,000, just 100 times in their life. Not a day, not every week, not every month, in their life. Because it only takes 100 minutes to do the random word exercise 100 times. But here's the punchline, Andy. Most people aren't willing to give 100 minutes out of their life to stand out from the 99% of their industry. So the question you need to all ask yourselves is, are you just going to write down how cool this exercise is? Or are you going to book 5 minutes in your schedule every day for 3 weeks, not 3 years, 3 weeks, to do it more times than your industry is willing to do it for?
That's the mic drop right there. You're quick. I mean, you have to come up with something quickly. What's happening in your mind? Is there a structure? Are you simply thinking beginning, middle, end? Are you trying to come up with a story that you can wrap the whole thing around? Or are you just trying to figure out, like, where am I going? And you're improvising, and then you end up there.
Great question. Here's what I'll say, Andy. Is anyone who, because this is a question I get all the time. And what I always say is, if you've done the random word exercise less than 100 times, the framework doesn't matter. In the sense that what I always like to say is, we don't get rewarded on how well we do the random word exercise. That's not how we get points in this game. We get rewarded on how many times we do it. So what you'll find is, after you do this 50, 75, 100 times, you'll start to develop your own style. I'll explain what I mean. Let's say I asked 5 different people, not to do the exercise, but just to tell me what their approach is. With the word coffee, they would give me 5 different answers. One of them would say, oh, like coffee in the morning. The other person would say, oh, I love coffee and like roasting the beans and the process and the detail. The third person will go like, I hate coffee. I'd probably talk about how much coffee destroys their body. And they'll always give a different perspective. And that's the magic of this exercise. There's no right or wrong answer. So to answer your question directly, I kind of just run with it. I mean, I made a ton of grammar mistakes when I was doing the random word exercise. But the point that I want to drive, and this is the transformation, is there's no answer to the random word exercise. The real answer is when you get to a point where you don't care anymore. And that's the problem with most of our Asian communities, with people who don't practice it enough, is they care too much about what other people have to say about them in meetings, where once they realize that there's a reason why they're a vice president in this company, there's a reason why they're a director, or else they wouldn't have that job. Right? Because it's a competitive space. And once they realize that there's a reason they're directed, they need to start thinking like a senior vice president, communicate like one, they'll have that certainty that I have now.
There's an open loop that I want to close before we part ways. You said there's this credibility thing that you're trying to build, and you're going to come back to that.
Absolutely. I think for me, at the end of the day, Andy, credibility is never given. It's always earned. So even for somebody like myself, right, who, might be young, absolutely. I started coaching when I was 19. I'm 26 currently, and most of my clients are in their 40s and 50s. But a lot of that isn't faking till you make it. I hate that advice. For me, it's really show me your receipts. Do the work. Actually work on people. Like for me at the beginning, when I started coaching, I would tell my executive clients, guys, I'm serious. You don't have to pay me until you get the result. That's how I built my book initially. And then when they felt I got them the result, then they started paying me. And that's what I've always believed in, is the idea that credibility is always earned, not given. So in the context of today's conversation, Andy, around communication, what does credibility look like? Trust me, Andy, if you're doing 100 random word exercises, and we didn't even talk about all the other things I'll mention really quick here. If you're doing 100 video messages, 100, just a few to people that you love, 20-second video messages. If you're doing the question drill, which is you reflect on one question you think the world will ask you, and you type up an answer, and you do one question every day for a year, and you'll have answered 365 questions about your business, your career, your life, you won't need me to tell you to be confident. You won't need me to tell you to drink a glass of water. You'll feel that confidence. You won't need me to tell you that anymore, because you'll know it for yourself. And that's the point. You earn that credibility.
Brenden, how do you define success?
I love that. How I define success. So there's 3 parts to how I define success. The first part is, and trust me, the first time I got asked this question, I had no idea. I was like, I don't know, I like helping people. There's 3 parts for me. The first part is success is about making a decision to find your gift, even if you don't know what the gift is. And the gift could be being a communication coach, being a podcaster, being a stay-at-home mom or dad. Make a decision to find the gift, even if it'll take time to find it. That's the first step to success. The second step to success is once you find the gift, cultivate it to the best of your abilities. So if you're a stay-at-home mom, be the best stay-at-home mom. Be as best as you can be for your children. If you want to be this thought leader, be the best thought leader you can be. Show up with energy, show up with enthusiasm, even you get to a point where you don't have to anymore. And the third piece, which is the one I'm the most excited about, is create space for other people to find theirs. So once you've made the decision to find the gift, once you've cultivated the gift to the best of your ability, start transitioning to the real definition of success. Is once you've filled up your own cup, once you find that gift, you found that passion, be sure to create space for other people to find their gift too. Because if we all lived in a society that helped us find our gift, that helped us cultivate it and share it with other people, boy, would we all be successful.
I love the idea of living a life of service. Tell the Inspired Money listeners and viewers where they can follow you and get more.
Absolutely, Andy. This is such a pleasure. Thanks for having me on. This is a wonderful conversation. So 2 ways to keep in touch. The first one is definitely MasterTalk. You just go to the YouTube channel. You'll have access to hundreds of free videos on how to communicate ideas. And then the second way to keep in touch, for those of you interested in coaching, just sign up for one of my Zoom free trainings, and you can register for that at rockstarcommunicator.com.
Thanks so much, Brenden.
Thank you so much, Andy.
So what was your favorite Inspired Money moment? Brenden has a courage in his 20s that I definitely didn't have at his age. I loved his random word exercise and other tips like recording 100 video messages. I never thought of communication and speaking like a muscle. Try giving yourself a workout by committing to the random word exercise for 100 days. Let's see if it can improve our effectiveness and abilities. If you had a different favorite Inspired Money moment, please post a comment or share it in the Inspired Moneymakers Facebook group at inspiredmoney.fm/Facebook. Thank you for tuning in to the end. Be sure to subscribe to my email that goes out every 2 weeks. It's written by the investment team at Runnymede Capital Management, where we share data, news, and events that we think are worth sharing. Subscribe at inspiredmoney.fm/newsletter. Thank you for joining me on this mission. Have an inspired week and do something that scares you, because that's where the magic happens.